Hey, what's going on, everyone? I know it's May, but we're going to be doing my March reading wrap up, and we're just going to have to deal with it because I feel like a completionist all of a sudden, even though I've been super inconsistent. So let's just go ahead and get started. So, first up, I finished Desert Solitaire by Edward Abbey, which I'd started in February, and what the hell's wrong with me? I thought this was one of those ones where I knew about it for 10,000 years, but I purposely wasn't reading it because I thought I was just gonna be one of those overhyped ones and stuff, and I totally screwed that up. So I'm disappointed you guys didn't force me to read that earlier. Fantastic. I can already tell this is gonna be in the top five of the year for sure. There's basically no question about that. This is a memoir of Edward Abbey as he was spending time in Arches National Monument, which became a national park, I think, a little bit after he was done, in the, I think, early 60s. I can't remember if it was the late 50s or early 60s when the stuff is taking place and everything, but just super well done, super witty. His observation skills are terrific, but his analogies between the wilderness and the wild and the natural world and the problems with human culture and encroachment and stuff, so well done. I'm definitely gonna be picking up a lot of his other stuff. He's got quite a few nonfiction books as well. Obviously he's most known for this one, but he had some fiction books that were recommended as well, and I think the Monkey Range Gang is kind of big one as far as fiction is concerned, so definitely gonna be checking out more of Edward Abbey. But yeah, if you've never read a nature book or you just want to read a couple nature books, make this one of them. Just do yourself a favor, for sure. I read John Polkinghorne's Quantum Theory, a very short introduction, just for the fun of it. I, I don't know. I have the vaguest brushstroke understanding of quantum mechanics, quantum theory, quantum anything, and I'm not sure this helped a lot. I think it helped some on a couple little things, but there was a lot of stuff I still didn't really quite get. So I'm going to be trying to read more on quantum stuff. It pops up every now and then in my science reading, so I just figure that's something I probably should get at least a tenuous grasp on, rather than just having it be this kind of nebulous sort of thing. I will say his descriptions and his writing style was very good. I can see why he was a really prominent kind of speaker and author on kind of these bigger philosophical and religious topics and stuff like that. So definitely try out Polkinghorne if you're in the mood for that kind of thing. All right. So the big one I read for March of the Mammoth here in March, back in March, was Silent Spring Revolution. John Kennedy, Rachel Carson, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, and the Great Environmental Awakening by Douglas Brinkley. This was a fantastic doorstopper of a book. I don't read tons on American history kind of stuff, but I read lots on nature and the environment, and I figure, might as well get a much better understanding of kind of this really developmental era in American politics as far as kind of environmental policy was concerned. Super fantastic. Geez, I don't even know where to start with this one. I did do an Instagram review of it because I didn't want to forget all this stuff, but it was just really interesting reading about kind of the main players in these different administrations that were helping to get stuff done. For example, Udall, probably most prominently under Kennedy. It was really nice too reading about how Maine played a little bit of part. The Allagash Wilderness Waterway came up quite a few times, which I don't know if I've ever read about the Allagash out in the wild and stuff in other books. So I thought that was really cool. But you got lots of primary source records from different scientists and writers and politicians kind of going on there. I just thought it was really cool how some of these societies were forming, how they were at loggerheads with each other, stuff like that. And just how even with the Nixon administration, how certain things kind of finally came about, to create the EPA and everything like that. And Lyndon Johnson isn't known for his environmental stuff, but I do feel after reading this book, that's one of the bigger things he should probably almost be known for. Like I said, just really good. If you like American politics or American history, this is definitely one you gotta pick up at some point. So let me do the 2 audiobooks before I forget. So one was my guilty pleasure Warhammer read, and this was Brothers of the Snake by Dan Abnett, which is all about the Iron Snakes Space Marine chapter. And usually Space Marine stuff is not like my favorite stuff to read about in 40k, but Dan Abnett did just super fantastic, really cool job with these guys. They have a big like kind of like, you know, ocean kind of Hydra thing kind of going on with like kind of their like sublore and everything. But the characters are actually really well done. I thought that one was quite good. And then I listened to another Oxford very short introduction. This one was Black Holes by Catherine Blumwell or some Blumdell, something like that. I'll have it have it up there. I did like this one. I feel like I was kind of trying to find some physical science books, astronomy type books, and stuff like that. And I feel like I do understand black holes a little bit more now. And then I read another book in April on black holes, but you have to wait and see about that one. So for whatever reason, but if you don't know anything about black holes, definitely pick up that one. I think you'll get a good, firm, like kind of basic understanding of what's going on there. So next up, we're going to do some of the books that I need to do some reviews of that were sent to me by publishers. So this one is from Avid Reader Press, and it's The Socrates Express in Search of Life Lessons from Dead Philosophers by Eric Weiner. And this one was one they just sent me in kind of like a care package. They just asked if they could send me a couple of books they thought I might like, and this was one of them. And I found this one really interesting. So this is like a journalist who just started getting into like, I don't know, homemade philosophy isn't the right word. Kind of get into philosophy like on his own, I think in his like late 40s, early 50s. And then he just starts to visit some of the locations that these philosophers lived and kind of like where they went and kind of musing on stuff like that. What I did like is not all the philosophers are like the big name ones you always hear about. Some of those are definitely included. But like people like Thoreau, Gandhi, what's his name? Epicurus is like included, which is really nice because Epicureanism is like my thing. And Epicurus gets slandered all the time and just ignored in the other half of the time. So really liked how we went into it. And kind of was like just describing kind of like his thoughts on like why he thought these were the ones, these texts and these writers were kind of like his favorites, or why he found them interesting or hit him like personally like in different ways and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely check that out if you're like brand new to philosophy and you don't want to read like primary texts or anything like that. You just kind of want to just the nice little breezy like intro into it. I think you probably could do worse than this one, to be honest. Next up we have Dark Brilliance, The Age of Reason, From Descartes to Peter the Great by Paul Strathern, and this one was from Pegasus Books. And I read a massive, monstrous, like 800, 900 page book on the Enlightenment last year called this one's Dark Brilliance. What was that one called? The Enlightenment, right here. The Pursuit of Happiness. As a buddy read with a bunch of friends and stuff, and that was super fun. And that kind of era, like the 1500s, 1600s, is probably one of my weaker historical kind of things. So after reading that one, I was like, I gotta like branch out and like read some more and figure out more about this period, just because, like I said, I've kind of glossed over it in the past. And this is all about some bigger minds and kind of not even just like scientists and thinkers per se, but a lot of like artists, which I actually, at first I was like, oh no, there's like, why is there a lot of chapters on different artists like Caravaggio and stuff? But actually, like looking back on it now that I've finished it, I actually really did enjoy that because I literally knew nothing about like the vast majority of them and stuff. But yeah, I just found it really cool. Like what's his name, like Leeuwenhoek. Leeuwenhoek is in there and stuff with kind of like the microscope. You got kind of obviously like the bigger names too, like Descartes and everything like that. But I did find it pretty well done. I think it's definitely more of a focus kind of on the scientific kind of big names aspect of things, whereas like the other one kind of covered more of like a social and big name like just all kind, like that one could fit like everything, whereas this one is definitely more like mini biographies on a lot of the different players. But like I said, I appreciate like learning more about the different kind of like art movements and kind of the big names in that sphere of things, and how they had impacts on like their different countries that they did stuff in. So yeah, really interesting. And then next up we have two kind of similar-ish ones. And this is Michael Albertus's Land Power: Who Has It, Who Doesn't, and How That Determines the Fate of Societies, from Basic Books. This one and the next one are ones I kind of read back to back, and the two of them combined, it's a lot of like modern policies, and like kind of within the last like couple generations, things have gone right and things have gone wrong. This one is all about how different countries around the world have tried to address the problem of land inequality for the most part, and how some have been sort of successful, kind of what were the reasons they were successful, like historically and in that context, what was kind of going on. And then obviously a lot of reasons why a lot of them have failed, as far as like different kinds of land management, land redistribution, stuff like that. But some reforms, like some tiller reforms, have actually done really well in some countries, and like I said, some just haven't. And it's definitely a combination of kind of the historical kind of lead up to what was going on right then, and then how it was also implemented has a kind of a big factor as well. But I did like how the book kind of covers pretty much all over the world. You got Southeast Asian stuff, you got a lot of stuff in South America, some European, even North America, with land reform in Canada, settler reform in Canada, especially during the 1800s and early 1900s, and kind of the problems there. But also how all these different reforms, kind of like the side effects as to how they fix certain other problems. Just for example, like in South America, one of the big ones, I think it was Guatemala, if I remember correctly, how kind of the kind of inbuilt patriarchal, like uber patriarchal society, where women couldn't even like own land basically at all, own hardly anything in their own name. How different like kind of land reform projects have slowly started to kind of erode that and make it a little bit more equitable between the two. So like I said, really enjoyed this one. I definitely need to like kind of almost I'm going to reread parts of both of these books before I do reviews on them, just because like I said, there is a lot of like maybe not what's the word, like political stuff, legal stuff, and just a bunch of different policies and stuff that I wasn't like super always like familiar with. So anyways, the next one up is Abundance by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, which is actually making a pretty big splash right now. I found this one fascinating. This one was really interesting. So this is all about how our economic policies are in like the completely wrong mindset, and how we really, I guess we do have the capability for an abundance kind of economy and everything, but we don't direct things really in the right way. So the question is, how do we get from like what we have now? And we have a whole bunch of problems. You know, we got energy problems, we got homelessness, housing problems, stuff like that. How do we redirect everything so we have an abundance of that stuff to kind of avoid the problems? And a lot of the book is actually dealing with where the left is kind of going wrong with a lot of these things. For example, most the one that I was interested in reading about, because I live in like super rural Maine, in the middle of nowhere, so we don't really have like zoning, at least not where I live, maybe down east Maine, but zoning stuff and housing like that isn't like so much of a problem, as far as instead of just like kind of income inequality and things like that. But where a lot of super left-leaning cities have all these like zoning things, and that all these zoning regulations and whatnot cause all the problems, and that's actually why we have a bunch of like housing problems like in like certain areas. He obviously goes, it's not like that black and white, and there's problems and this, that, and the other thing and everything, but those were like some specific examples. And the thing is, like I'm saying, like it's a big critique of a lot of like kind of left policies. That's partly because like some of these issues, the right isn't even like in the same ballpark, as far as like energy, abundant energy and stuff. They're not, they deny climate. The right generally denies climate change and everything. So you can't really, like I said, the conversation isn't even like happening, let alone like critiquing and fixing it and everything like that. But like I said, on all these different issues, it's kind of just critiquing what we're doing like absolutely wrong, and how as a first world developed nation with tons of money, we should be able to kind of create an abundant supply of a lot of this stuff, and we're not, because we're just sucking it up, basically. So anyways, I'm contemplating doing like a complete reread of this now that I kind of vaguely know a little bit more. I do plan on like listening to some of his podcasts and stuff too to see if I can get a little bit better understanding of some of his arguments and whatnot. And like I said, I don't even agree with everything in there because I do feel like with some of the stuff like like emphasizing some deregulations and stuff, if it was like done with a scalpel, maybe, his arguments made sense, but I just have a feeling once you start like opening that floodgate, it's gonna be like bad like later on for like other unintended things. But like I said, definitely something to consider and think about, everything like that. So really, really interesting there. So there you have it. Those were, I think, 9 books that I finished in the month of March. Hopefully I remembered those halfway decently and stuff. If you can remember what your favorite book in March was, let me know down below. I'm always on the lookout for good recommendations and everything like that. And whatever you end up reading this month in May, always remember, read victoriously.